we ready to start? Yes, staff?
I'm looking around. We look ready.
All right, so let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, please. Oh, actually, yes. Sorry.
Directors Akbari,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
Weed, and Huang.
Here. See, now he's not here. You messed up my thing. Director Sethy, would you leave us?
Okay.
Everybody on my notice here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next is public comment. Members of the public may address the board on any issue not listed on the agenda, which are within the purview of the Alameda County Water District. A 5-minute limit is customary. However, the board president, me, may adjust the actual time allotted to accommodate the number of speakers. Members of the public who wish to address the board on a scheduled agenda item should approach the speaker's podium at the time the item is introduced. At this time, do I have any members of the public that wish to speak to the board? Seeing none, let's move on to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to add items to the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to add items 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 to the consent calendar.
Actually, I think Director Sethy has a comment on 5.3, so can you amend your motion?
I'll amend that to add 5.1 and 5.2 to the consent calendar.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Do I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
Move the consent calendar as amended.
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. So, item 5.3.
Okay. Is Mr. Nizer speaking on behalf of Water Resources today?
Yes, Ms. Hydis is ill at home this evening, and Mr. Nizer is covering for her.
Okay. So I apologize, first of all. I was not at the Water Resources Committee meeting this past month because of a business conflict, but I would like to ask a couple of questions, and I have some ideas to offer.
Okay.
Well, as always, right? So we are limiting this controller rebate to 100 rebates right now through the end of the fiscal year.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether we have budgeted for next year a certain allotment of controllers.
The intention is to, we're in the budget process presently, and we're really going to look to see what kind of response we get to the offer as we finish out this fiscal year, but that is the intention.
Okay. I'm hoping that we can deliver get maybe 5% of our customers to adopt this, which would be roughly 2,500 or 3,000 controllers, something like that, for single-family residential, right?
Correct.
That's what this is focused on.
Correct.
Not businesses or commercial or anything like that.
No, this is not a commercial grade unit. We still have a program for commercial industrial customers, but this is really geared towards a more simplified, user-friendly, sort of modeled after the Nest, if you're familiar with that thermistor.
Right. So my second question is, how are we going to promote this new controller?
So it's my understanding of, it is a subscription program through BOSCA, so BOSCA will do a fair amount of the marketing, but Ratio has also provided, I believe, marketing materials to be customized by ACWD, and I believe our Community Affairs group is participating, or working on that with the Conservation group.
So I'm hoping that there will be a link to Ratio on our website, first of all. I don't know if it's practical, but I'll offer up the idea that maybe a bill insert to our customers might be nice. I want to say I really admire this company, Ratio, with whom I've talked with the senior founders of the company at different conferences. This is not a fly-by-night startup. They've got really strong venture capital behind them. The company's been taking off like a rocket. They have almost created a monopoly position in the marketplace for what they're doing. And I believe, and I'm stating this for the public benefit here, I believe that the reason they're so successful right out of the gate as a startup is that they listened to their customer requirements. Instead of telling the customers what they should have, they really understand, talk to a lot of people in the water industry, people that are homeowners, and they understand their customer requirements. I think that's really important for any brand new company. I have another suggestion too, which I brought up previously, and I'm hoping we can experiment with this a little bit. We have our rain barrel rebates, and now we have the controller here too. When you go to the hardware stores around town, garden centers, there's no mention of the ACWD rebate that's involved with the product. People just don't know unless they somehow have encountered, information on our website. I'm hoping that we can put a label on products like PG&E does on appliances that says, call ACWD for your rebate of this dollar amount on a rain barrel. The controllers are sold at the hardware stores by Raccio. We should have a label on, or a signage or something that says, look for your ACWD rebate on the product. Lastly, my understanding from attending some of the BOSCA meetings is that this is going to be offered for a few years.
That's correct. They entered into a contract. It was a competitive bid process, and they have a multi-year contract. I don't know the term, though.
Right. So I'm hoping that we will budget for it in the subsequent fiscal years that we have. Those are all my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions on the directors? If not, do I have any questions or comments from members of the public? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll move staff recommendation.
Second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. Item 5.4, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Item 5.4 involves a resolution approving an updated Delta Conveyance Finance Authority Joint Powers Authority Agreement, and that will be presented by Manager of Finance, Jonathan Wonderwick.
Good evening, members of the board and public. The board adopted a resolution May 11, 2018, authorizing the general manager to execute agreements related to California Water Fix, including the Joint Powers Authority Agreement for the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority. On July 3rd of 2018, the district became one of the Finance Authority's 3 founding members. Due to an updated project definition for Delta Conveyance and changes in Finance Authority membership, each Finance Authority member has been asked to adopt a revised Joint Powers Authority Agreement. This item was reviewed with the Water Resources and Conservation Committee on February 26, 2020. And approval of this item will help achieve Strategic Plan Goal 2.2, protect existing imported water supplies. The staff recommendation this evening is to, by motion, adopt a resolution approving an updated Delta Conveyance Finance Authority Joint Powers Authority Agreement, and 2, authorize the general manager to execute the amended agreement as set forth in the resolution. And a clean copy of the revised agreement, I believe, has been distributed this evening. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from staff?
No, one comment. I happen to sit on the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority for the district as a director, and we thoroughly reviewed all of the amendments to our agreement from all the participants, all 11 agencies. So I'm very supportive of what we have here on the table.
Director Gunther, any
No,
comments?
this went through committee, and it was very well explained. It is quite necessary.
Thank you. Director Akbari, no
No
comments?
questions for me.
Any questions or comments from member of the public? Sir, please approach the podium and introduce yourself, please.
Kelly Abreu, Mission Peak Conservancy. The Delta conveyance has been renamed many times. It first started in the 1940s. One thing that's not at all clear to me, and I've been looking at this a lot, is the price. How many dollars per acre foot are the purchasers going to be paying? And are they all paying the same price? Or are they paying different amounts? You know, is the Kern County Water Bank going to pay any different? Metropolitan Water District or then ACWD? Usually what happens in these things is that the wealthy water utility companies in Silicon Valley or LA pay a higher price. The urban people pay a much higher price, but I don't know how this one's working. Secondly, that's just the cost to this district. There's an overall cost and there's an overall benefit, and most of these large civil engineering projects have a cost-benefit ratio. The University of Pacific in Stockton has done 2 cost-benefit studies, one in 2012, one in 2016. Both of them came to similar conclusions on this project. They forecast, their analysis finds that for every $1 in cost, they're projecting 25 cents, 25 cents of net benefit. So overall, this is a big money loser, and it doesn't pencil out on paper, according to their research. And you guys can use Google as well as I can. You can find those reports. And finally, there's the thing that's been happening in California and happens everywhere. It's a law of nature, or a law of physics, or a law of economics. It's called Huang's paradox. Huang was an economist from 150 years ago in England, and he did the studies on coal consumption. He was forecasting that with greater efficiency, that the steam engines were getting much more efficient on coal, and their coal consumption, coal efficiency was fantastically improving, like factors of 2 or 3 or 5. So he forecast that net coal consumption in England was going to increase, regardless of efficiency increases. This paradox was borne out in England with coal. It's been borne out in water in California. Water in California, as you increase the supply, the demand expands to consume all the additional supply and more. So what's broken in California is not the supply system. What's broken in California is the market pricing mechanism to balance supply and demand. This is completely broken. And they don't even call water purchases a water purchase. They don't even call the consumers or the buyers a consumer or buyer. They call them contractors. They call the water purchases appropriations or water rights. They have this incredible system of changing the names of things that everybody else uses to make it more of a God-given right to obtain water in large quantities for certain uses. Until that's fixed, this project is not going to pencil out economically, and it needs to be. I think that the first people who should be backing off from this are the ones who are paying the high prices, which is us. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have any comments?
Would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
Sure, I could just for the record that the cost sharing is by unit. Everyone who's participating will be paying the exact same price. So no difference between ag and municipal. That's part of what's slowing down the project is because ag business can't afford that full price, and that's a bit of the burden there. But as we presented here in this board, the need for the project is more about maintaining existing resiliency and ability to deliver water versus actually new supply. In fact, much of the forecast is actually no increase in supply at all because the delta is really being controlled by the environmental flow requirements requirements, and those will be in place with or without the tunnel. So our biggest concern as an agency is making sure that we have a seismically resilient delivery mechanism to get the water to the south of Delta, more so than as an enhancement to water supply.
So if I may, thank you, Mr. Nizer. To add to Mr. Nizer's comments, in average years, Alameda County Water District relies on the State Water Project, which is the supply we're talking about, for 40% of its overall water supply. In the previous incarnation of this project, when it was proposed to be 2 tunnels, the Board of Directors asked staff to look into the possibility of other alternatives as opposed to participating in this project. And at that time, with the project as it was known then, and it was larger and more expensive, it penciled out that participating in this project would be much less expensive for our customers than developing suitable water supplies to make up for the difference, or even to have conservation and other water supplies to make up for the difference. So in terms of your questions, there's a lot to parse out there, but because the project has not been totally defined yet, it's in the environmental review process, the dollars per acre foot is not known. It also depends on who the participants are and what the final contract terms are, and those have not been negotiated completely yet. In terms of how agencies pay, the State Water Project, which is the part that we're a part of, the justification for the cost that each agency bears is based on the actual operating cost. So I expect that this contract that gets developed, should the project move forward, would be equitable as well. And then the board has still provided staff with firm direction that the business case for ACWD's participation in the project still needs to hold up based on the ultimate costs of this project. So that's where we are now. There'll be many more updates for the board of directors, and the public is invited to attend and participate as hopefully the landscape becomes a little more clear and we're able to answer your questions in more detail. So I hope that that's sufficient for now, because there's still a lot of uncertainty associated with the actual cost of the project.
Thank you, and thank you, sir. And Director
I'd like
Sethy?
to make a brief board comment, because I know Mr. Abreu quite well. I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts, Kelly. First of all, and I'm only expressing my personal opinion, that the reason for us to participate in the Delta conveyance is really reliability of water supply delivery. As I tell people out in the community, we live on the Hayward Fault. And if you look back 1,500 years, the interval between 6.8 earthquakes and higher on the Hayward Fault, based on scientific studies by USGS, is an interval of 90 to 165 years. The average is 140 years. We are now in year 152. And most of those levees in the Delta were built post-gold rush. And if we have a major quake on the Hayward Fault, we are more than likely to see seawater go all the way through the Delta down to Tracy. There will be no delivery system of fresh water from Northern California to 2/3 of the population of California that depends upon this water supply, including south of Delta, Zone 7, ACWD, and Santa Clara Valley Water District. We are part of Southern California. Anything south of Delta is part of Southern California. So somebody who's spent my career in Silicon Valley. I believe that this is the little engine that runs the California economy and the U.S. economy, and I don't want to put that in jeopardy, this water supply that we have. So those are just some thoughts to think about here.
Thank you, Director Sethy. Any other comments from the board? Yes.
Briefly, I'll just say that, the comments are, the board takes them, and they've been all in our thoughts all along, and one of the reasons you want to be on the agency, and particularly have Director Sethy there, is you're now a player, and we can defend our position. And reliability is vital. And we've looked at this, we've done the studies, and really it does pencil out, just as Mr. Nizer said, it's reliability, and absolutely critical. If we had another plan, a better business plan for this, we wouldn't be here. But that study was done several years ago when the cost was even higher. So we've looked at it, we'll continue to look at it, but we've already made that analogy. Those have been done.
So for me personally, I might be the slightly different person, different point of view on this board if you look back through our board meetings. For me, it's a balance between reliability, affordability, and environmental stewardship. And I will say the past studies that we have conducted, including looking at recycled water, the balance just isn't quite there for Alameda County Water District. 40% is a lot of water to make up. Conservation alone is just not going to do it. Does that mean that we're going to stop looking and stop evaluating the business case? That's definitely not true. We're very clear to our staff that the business case still needs to be there in order for us to be accountable to our customers. So we're definitely still looking at it, working on it, and once this project is more defined, this new project, I am sure staff will be back at the board with a presentation about the pros and cons and what their recommendation would be. And just a note, we have to participate in this process, as other directors have said. This way we could at least guide the process to a point. And speaking for myself, by participating and having a role in it, if in the event in the future we decide that we don't need this asset, we could sell it. But by not participating, we're giving up that right. So it is a very good decision at this point for this board, based on what we know, to proceed with this. So with that, do I have any other comments from the directors?
I'll move the staff recommendation. I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
Huang.
Aye. With that, let's move on to item 5.5, please.
Yes, item 5.5 involves the authorization of a professional services agreement for managed and professional support services for the district's customer information system. And once again, this will be presented by Mr. Wunderlich.
In 2012, the district implemented a new customer information system purchased from Kayenta, a division of N. Harris Computer Corporation. With the staff retirement and the addition of the new electronic billing and payment system, district staff evaluated multiple options to continue and enhance support for Kayenta and recommended piloting direct Kayenta support services for a one-year term that started last May. During the evaluation period of this one-year pilot, staff concluded that Kayenta Managed and Professional Services are a cost-effective way to continue to provide support for our customer information system. Since Kayenta is the sole provider of these services, this meets the requirements for a sole source contract the board can approve in accordance with Section I of the district's procurement policy. There's adequate funding in the current fiscal year budget for these services, and sufficient funding for these services will be included in future budget proposals. This item was reviewed with the Finance Committee on February 18, 2020, and board authorization of this agreement will assist the district in achieving strategic goal 1, maintain and improve the cost effectiveness and value of district services. And so the staff recommendation this evening on this item is by motion, authorize the general manager to enter into a professional services agreement with Kayenta, a division of N. Harris Computer Corporation, to provide managed and professional services for the customer information system for a 3-year base term in an amount not to exceed $265,000, and to execute up to 2 one-year extensions totaling $93,000 and $95,000 respectively, for a total not to exceed amount of $453,000 over 5 years. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the directors? Any questions or comments from public? No? Okay. With that, do I have any recommendations from the board?
I'll second.
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther,
Aye.
Sethy,
Aye.
and Huang.
Aye. With that, I guess we're on 6.1 reports.
Staff was not planning on providing any additional information on the board committee reports, but we're happy to respond to any questions.
Any questions from the board regarding the committee reports?
I have a comment on the water production.
Okay, then we will move on to, if there's nothing under 6.1, 6.2 is the operational reports. Any comments from the board? Director Sethy?
So I just wanted to recognize that for the month of February, our water delivery out to the community was, I'm just approximating this from the chart, but about 32 MGD for the month versus the forecast of 27 MGD. Again, I'm just roughly figuring it out. So that's 5 MGD per day over forecast, and our water deliveries actually met the curve of the pre-drought era, we can call it that, for the first time early in the year. In talking to, I had a very brief conversation with Nicole Sankula from the CEO of Bosca, and she mentioned to me that the same was true of nearly all of the Bosca customers that are using Hetchetchee water, that were up back to pre-drought levels. For a while we had a behavioral change that we noticed in water usage around the Bay Area, but oddly, it surged in February. We've had a dry winter. I'm happy for the revenue. We're selling a product, but it's something to keep in mind as we move forward into the summer months.
And we'll have additional information about just how dry this winter is so far when we get to the water supply update. And I think it will probably grab the board's attention.
Well, I very well remember the 75 through 77 drought while my father was an employee here at the district in the engineering department. And I always think of that period as being the driest I ever went through. And I see that we're right on that curve right now.
And the other thing for the board to realize is that there has been a fair amount of growth since 2014-15 in our service area. So I think some of the behavior changes that we've seen are still baked in, because with more customers, the water demand is going to go up. But I think the fact that February was so amazingly dry also had to do with it as well.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to point out on my normal report here that I am still watching the hardness report, and once again, we have done a terrific job. We only have a couple readings at 160. I think the highest is 162, maybe another 161. This is well done. I don't think a lot of people understand how much this has really gone down within the last 20 years or so. I can't remember.
And Director Gunther, my home is down in the 80s.
I know. But I am in Union City, and the hammer we need to break the water off as we take it out now is much smaller. So thank you so much.
My water is so soft that it takes me extra water just to shower off all the soap.
And we thank you for the extra revenue. Any other questions? No? Okay, then let's move on to staff presentations. Item 6.3.1, water supply update.
Thank you, Madam President. We have two staff presentations related to water resources. The first one, a water supply update, will be introduced by Mr. Nizer.
Thank you. Speaking of high demand in February, we have Leonard Asher, new water supply supervisor, who will be providing an update for the board, largely consistent with what was presented to the committee last month, but refining our actions as we head into this dry year. I think you'll find it quite interesting.
All right, good evening. I'm Leonard Ash, water supply supervisor, and tonight I have the privilege to give you the water supply update as we see it so far this year. We're all aware of the fact that we had a bone-dry February. That was the first time in our local hydrology since 1953 that we've had zero precipitation in February. And that's the second time going back in 149 years of our local hydrology. So we can see that this year already is rivaling our driest years on record. What we see locally is also being mimicked across the state. We see a trend with our Northern Sierra 8th Station Index showing that precipitation is well below average as well. Thank goodness California has good storage this year. Unlike the dry year that we had in 2013 and 14, where this same amount of rain resulted in an unprecedented 0% allocation that was subsequently raised to a 5% allocation in September. This year we're fortunate that storage is good enough that the State Water Project has issued a 15% allocation this year. But we'd all like to know if it'll rain. We look at the 6 to 10 day outlook showing modest probabilities of an above normal occurrence of precipitation. And if we look 1 to 2 weeks out, those predictions are for likely normal precipitation. And finally, 1 month out, the outlook shows an equal chance of either above normal, below normal, or just normal precipitation. So the long story short is that we're in a very dry year, and we may remain so. Luckily, district staff has a plan for that. Specifically, Chapter 10 of our Urban Water Management Plan describes our planning efforts in cases like this. And our first priority is protecting our local groundwater. And we have 3 different actions listed in our water shortage contingency plan to address that. One is to maximize imports of additional water to recharge our groundwater basin. Secondly, reducing use of local groundwater whenever possible. And 3, maximize our use of imported supplies. So to meet this plan, the district is focusing on maximizing imported water. First, with our State Water Project carryover water, this is water that we've saved from last year, over 12,000 acre feet are waiting for us in San Luis. In addition, we have 13,700 acre feet of full semi-tropic return that we can bring back from our banked storage. Add to that our SFPUC contract for water purchases from the regional water system and the judicious use of our groundwater reserves. ACWD has adequate supplies to meet our 2020 demands. But we don't want to stop there. Staff is pursuing additional dry year supplies in the form of the Turn Back Water Pool Program and the Dry Year Water Transfer Program to augment those imported supplies. This will help save on purchased water costs, and more importantly, this allows us to prepare for next year. As I mentioned, we're sitting pretty good with storage statewide right now. However, given that this was a very dry year, we'll need at least a wet year to catch up. So if next year is a dry year or even an average year, ACWD assumes that the State Water Project will probably not increase their allocations above what we've seen this year. So we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best. To position ourselves best for 2021, we want to sustain carryover storage in San Luis. Just like this year we're benefiting from that storage we saved last year, we want to put our Table A allocations as well as the balance of our semi-tropic returns this year into storage in San Luis for next year. We want to keep our groundwater storage levels as high as we can, and staff will continue to monitor for additional opportunities to import water. On one final note, I should say that a dry year does have increased costs. The district customers benefit from our diverse water supply portfolio, and in turn, we benefit from their careful use of water. The demand management practices that we've seen during the drought have been sustained, and so customers' lower demands overall have positioned us to be able to meet the demands we project for this year. However, our typical approach in budgeting is that we budget for an average water year. When we go into a dry year, those additional imported water costs will have additional costs to the district. We estimate if we have a baseline approach of increasing our imports with our existing contracts, that we would have approximately $6.5 million in additional imported water costs. However, staff is trying to be strategic. As I mentioned, we're pursuing other transfer opportunities, and we're hoping that we can optimize and bring those imported water costs down to something that's currently projected around $4.7 million.
Leonard, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Real quick. How many acre-feet of water are we talking about under those two different scenarios?
Sure. Let me go back. Under the Turnback Water Pool Program, the district has requested 2,000 acre-feet. However, it may be unlikely that we would realize that given that it is a dry year, but we've covered our bases by requesting it. The second program, the Dry Year Water Transfer Program, that's where the state water contractors enter into agreements with farmers to fallow their agricultural use. That Dry Year Water Transfer Program looks more positive to realize some water imports this year. And for that one, after calculating losses for conveyance, we're estimating around 3,000 acre-feet is what we could see if we get everything that we're requesting under that program.
So you mentioned 6.4 million and,
Yes.
and 4.7. So are we talking about $3,000 per acre-foot?
Well,
potentially?
for the $6.5 million projection, we're estimating that approximately 1.3 will be needed for full semi-tropic returns, and 5.2 for the additional SFPUC purchases. And then under the 4.7 million, we'd look at reducing that SFPUC, that increased purchase above our minimum purchase, because that is our most expensive source of water. So we would be bringing in more water through surface water deliveries, using our surface water treatment plant, and also through Vallecito's takeoff.
So approximately within a range, what are we talking about in terms of cost per acre-foot?
Well, so the SFPUC cost per acre-foot is around 1,400. I'm sorry, 1,800 per acre-foot, and then the Dry Year Transfer Program water, and I'll have to look to Thomas, who's been working on our behalf on that effort.
Yeah, the Dry Year Program is right now, it's in the open negotiation, so we can't really commit to too much price in public record, but the current ask is at about 300, and the sellers are bargaining at around 450. So we're assuming the worst case scenario, maybe that 450. And just for the numbers, we're actually upped our request. It's 6,500 acre-feet that we're asking for north of Delta. We will lose about 27% of that in conveyance, though. That'll end up with about 4,700 at the bottom.
Mr. Neiser, we're also talking a little bit about apples and oranges, are we not?
Correct.
Because the $4.7 million alternative results in a higher groundwater basin elevation?
That's correct, yeah. So if this goes, if we can operate under that strategic approach which Mr. Ash laid out for you, we would save, as you can see, almost $2 million and also have about 3 feet more water in the Niles Cone come the end of the year, which will be ready for 2021. With that, we'll point out that we will be barely at the bottom of good enough in the Niles Cone. So it's the best we can ask for 2021.
You're talking about $300 to $450 per acre foot?
North of the delta, and we lose about 27% conveyance, so the effective unit cost of what we could take delivery of is going to be more like $700 when you just factor in the lost water. We still have to treat it.
Yeah, that seems very, very low, in my opinion.
That's about right. At the height of the drought, this water was going for $600 an acre foot, which relates to $1,000 when it gets to the south of delta.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the height of the most recent drought, which, as Mr. Ash pointed out, was far more restrictive in terms of state storage.
So if we translate this for our customers, this is a good deal.
I couldn't put it better myself.
Okay.
And I want to point out, my final point on this slide is that obviously these costs would be offset with increased water purchases. So we'll be importing this water, but through increased water sales. So as we import this water, you're looking at the cost to purchase it, but we're purchasing it in effort to sell it. So we will be offsetting these costs with water sales. So in summary, it's a good news story for this year that although we are in a very dry year, both locally and at the state level, we do have adequate supplies sufficient to meet our 2020 demands, and we're looking to optimize to put ourselves in a good position if 2021 is also a dry year as well. And that's due to continued low demands and our healthy storage, both locally and across the state. Are there any other questions?
So Leonard, I do have a question. So under your two different scenarios, do you have an estimate of what's the rate impact? I understand we have to spend more money to buy water, but then that translates to more water sale. But in terms of rate impact, are we going to see any large rate impacts, or is this going to be in the noise? Would it be covered by our emergency funds? How would it be addressed?
Well, and I'll defer that answer to our finance manager, Mr. Wunderlich.
Sure. The full cost would probably not be completely offset by additional revenue. We would have to see which option we're able to pursue and then see what the actual customer demands come into this spring. So it's really hard to give you a specific answer. I can say, I did review this afternoon the draft budget report that will be presented to Finance Committee next week. I think, that there's a reasonable chance that even though the water supply line would go over budget, the district as a whole would still stay within the bottom line budget with this additional cost. Now, some of that may be the result of the timing of, say, certain construction dollars in capital. So that's a long-winded way of saying we plan on doing a financial planning process this summer to look at our next 2-year rates process.
Okay.
And the net effect of this would be then would be there within our existing reserve balances as we begin that process. But I would not see on a single year basis this having a substantial impact on customer rates.
Thank you. Now, as a director and as a customer, that usually my first question, how does that translate? How does that impact me? All right, thank you. I think that's, any other questions? Director Gunther?
I'd just like to comment that, here we've had an extremely dry February, probably one of our worst, and we're going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we're going to make it is all those options. The staff has done an admirable job keeping those options there over the years. This is years of work, and when we talk about rates, people come in, and it's like drop a straw into the ground. And had we were we in that position, and that's the only thing we've done, we'd be in terrible shape. We haven't. And I just wanted to point that out, because I think it's important that people understand we got where we are today because we planned for it. We got down in semi-tropic. We were one of the first people down there. We got our groundwater basin in a healthy position because we planned for it. This didn't happen because it happened. It takes staff. It takes effort. I just want to thank the staff for that effort and make it public that, yes, this is one of the things that your rates pay for. To be able to have one of the most driest Februaries around, and we're going to be okay. You're going to be able to turn on the faucet and the water's going to come out. As I've always said, it doesn't matter how cheap it is or the quality of it. If it doesn't come out, it is absolutely worthless. And this is what we're paying for. I think it's a prime example.
Additional comments? Director Akbari?
No questions. The one question I had was about the rate impact, but Director Huang did ask that already. Obviously, this is top of the mind for many of our customers, given that the dryness of the season. So I appreciate the information here, and it'll certainly come in handy when we go and talk to our customers in the community.
And just to close, thank you, Leonard, for the great presentation, and I would just want to emphasize what Director Gunther said. We are in such a great position in terms of water supply is due to a lot of foresight from our staff and from our past directors. This didn't happen by accident. And also from our staff's answer, you could see that they are very aware of the rate impact, and they are doing their very best to minimize the rate impact to our customers. These decisions are not made lightly. They are all very well balanced, and the credit should go to our staff for understanding how important that is to us. With that, any comments from the member of public? I can see Kelly wants to make a comment. Would you please reintroduce yourself again, sir, please?
Kelly Abreu, Mission Peak Conservancy. The planning horizon on this, it seems like, from what I can hear, it's been 1 or 2 years. And 2 years, it seems like a long time to this organization to plan out. And the State Water Project, if you go back and look at the history books, the planning horizon for that thing, and they had massive dams and rivers and everything else being built, aqueducts in the 60s. That had a planning horizon of at least 5 years, maybe 7 years. And that should be the kind of thing. The target should not be stable pricing. The target should be a stable level in that aquifer. And pricing is a lever that you use to achieve that goal. And that's not a rate impact, it's a rate adjustment knob. So the supply management is exceedingly careful, but it seems like the rate changes are somehow, we're reluctant to use that lever, and if the lever ever gets used, it would be a sign of failure. No, it's a sign of proper management. There's a thing in this water industry called cost-based pricing, which is built into the California water law, which shows you how insanely contrary to economic reality California water laws really are. Cost-based pricing is unreal. It's insane. I'll give you an example. Cell phones. God gave you airwaves. The airwaves are free. Bandwidth on cell phones costs nothing for the government. They auction it off for $100 billion. That's not cost-based. That's cost plus. That's amazing. And why is that? Because it's congestion-based demand management. The fixed charges that these urban water systems charge, which is including yours, are contrary to that. You have fixed charges that are regressive, that hit the lowest income people first, and tend to dilute the demand, that make the demand-based pricing lever more difficult to use. So with all that, my point is we need more demand-based pricing. We have this word, the wording rate impact has to be purged from the vocabulary. The wording of cost-based pricing built into the California State Water Law has to be flushed down the toilet. There has to be massive changes, not on the supply management. These people are experts at supply management. There has to be massive changes in the pricing structure and economic interpretations of this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, sir, and you might have just volunteered yourself to come and participate in our discussion when we start talking about rates. With that, let's see, next one is the Niles Cone Groundwater Condition and Survey Report.
Thank you, Madam President. It's that time of the year in which Michael Hollowell makes his annual presentation to the board about the state of our groundwater basin. And we're pleased to have Mike, who always does a great job making this presentation for you. And Mr. Nizer will provide some opening remarks, and then we'll see what Mike has to say this year.
Thank you. The Replenishment Assessment Act of Alameda County Water District requires the board to order an engineering survey and report on groundwater conditions, which was ordered by the board on November 14th, 2019. And it is the first step in the process of establishing a replenishment assessment for the next fiscal year. Recommendations in the survey report on groundwater conditions are based on projected activities needed to sustain the groundwater basin in fiscal year 2020 and 21, with consideration of groundwater levels and quality documented in the 2019 Groundwater Monitoring Report. Tonight, Mike Hallowell, Groundwater Resources Engineer, is presenting information on the Niles Cone Groundwater Conditions and Survey Report to assist the board in its review of the two reports received by the board on February 13th, 2020. Eileen Chen, who is not here, as a groundwater resource scientist and author of the Groundwater Monitoring Report, was a contributing author. This is, we've asked to limit numbers due to the coronavirus. This is Mike's 28th year authoring the survey report, and will be Eileen's 16th year authoring the Groundwater Monitoring Report. In addition, tonight's presentation just happens to coincide with National Groundwater Awareness Week. With that.
Okay. Well, thank you, members of the board, and thank you for allowing time for our presentation this year. With the survey report and the monitoring report distributed at the February board meeting and the public hearing on replenishment assessment coming up in April, it's our hope that the board and public will find our material tonight to be both timely and beneficial. So to that end, we'll touch on groundwater basin conditions, the finances related to the district's work to take care of the groundwater basin, and with that we'll shine a spotlight on the analysis that led to staff's recommendation on the replenishment assessment rate for fiscal year 2021. Looking back at the calendar, after the public hearing, the last order of business for the board for the year on replenishment assessment is to adopt the resolutions. And the resolutions contain the board's findings, including what the replenishment assessment rate will be effective July 1. In past years, the board's been able to get to those resolutions the same evening as the public hearing, and so they are scheduled that way again for this year, but with the understanding that if the board were to need more time, it could continue the hearing with another special meeting or meetings. It's just that the public hearing, which must start on April 14th, would need to be closed on or before May 5th, and the resolutions adopted on or before May 12th in order to comply with the Replenishment Assessment Act. And in this intro, I think I did say the word basin a couple of times, so let's give that some physical meaning. I'm a little behind on my clicks. Okay. ACWD manages groundwater resources over a 107 square mile area bounded by this brown line. That geographically defines the Niles Cone groundwater basin. Groundwater that can be pumped at high rates is encountered at intervals of depth that are rich in sand and gravel, which we know as aquifers. And if we take a cutaway view, a cross-section through the strata, we can see where these aquifers are. But note the Hayward Fault as we transition slides. Okay, now it's a vertical line. The Hayward Fault is a barrier to lateral groundwater flow, hydraulically subdividing the groundwater basin into two management areas. The above Hayward Fault, containing the AHF aquifer to the right, and to the left we have the below Hayward Fault subbasin or management area, consisting of a stack of 4 aquifers. They are the Newark, the Centerville, the Fremont, and the Deep. The Centerville and Fremont are often conceptualized as one unit, called the Centerville-Fremont aquifer. The Newark aquifer has a strong interconnection or interaction with San Francisco Bay. And so what that means is that when well levels in the Newark aquifer are below sea level, we get seawater intrusion, and that's what happened in from the early 1900s to the early 1970s. Once it came in sufficiently inland, salt water made its way downward through natural weaknesses in the aquitards and through abandoned wells. Well levels in the Newark were below sea level because of overpumping relative to the limited recharge of that time. The recharge capacity was increased with augmentation of the artificial recharge program beginning in the 1960s, and other critical programs would be put in that time as well. And no small surprise, well levels began to rebound with the Newark aquifer reaching above sea level in 1972, and then going higher to the maximal range that we have today. So that not only stopped saltwater intrusion, but began reversed the flow, and with that, pushing some of the brackish water back out to the bay. So there has been progress, substantial progress, in restoring the basin, but there's still a certain amount, a good amount of brackish water left behind, and we keep tabs on that through our semi-annual groundwater monitoring events. Our field staff get out to numerous wells throughout the basin, and they collect samples, and the data that comes back enables my colleague Eileen Chen to update her chloride concentration contour maps in the area that's been restored since 1962, as shown in cross-hatching here for the Newark aquifer. But I understand these maps may kind of look the same from year over year, so you may wonder, are we still moving the needle? And to help answer that question, we charted the chloride concentration history in individual wells. There are about a dozen along the 250 ppm line. I'll just show one to typify what we saw. And what you see is some fluctuation, but a definite trend of about 5% decline per year. And now to the Centerville-Fremont aquifer. These are the chlorides in the fall of 2019. This is the change in brackish water area since 1962. We did consider the chloride concentrations in individual wells throughout the whole region, but I'll just show 3 to typify what we saw, and notice that they're in this area of increase. Okay, so a decline, decline, and a decline. And now on to the deep aquifer, starting with the middle of the groundwater basin, a decline, about 1%, and now we come to the northwest part here. This part of the brackish water area in the deep aquifer, we didn't know about it until about 2005 when we put in some new monitoring wells, but the data that we have since then, including the last 10 years, is a modest but a pronounced decline. Now, I don't want to convey the idea that every single well that's in the district has a declining trend. There is a minority that have an increasing trend, but the minority is small enough that it makes us feel pretty good about what's going on in the groundwater basin in each of the aquifers. And we credit that to some things that the district's been doing over the years, such as getting abandoned wells properly destroyed and sealed. And number 2, pumping for our distribution system is being done with good stewardship of the groundwater basin. We shifted pumping demand from, some of our pumping demand, a good amount of it actually, from inland wells to inland well fields out to the higher chloride ARP wells. And as a result, we've been able to remove this much salt, which is trapped in the Seminole Fremont Aquifer otherwise. About 10,000 metric tons of total dissolved solids, of which 3,700 metric tons is chloride. And finally, number 3, replenishing well flows with fresh water at the quarry lakes. Now, as we saw in the last presentation, we put this scenario together in December when we didn't know about the dry winter, so these numbers, of course, are going to change, but we do anticipate, so this was the scenario, we do anticipate getting substantial, still significant water in the basin, enough to have ample groundwater levels. Our semi-annual monitoring events include not only sampling wells, but also recording well levels over a large number of wells so that we can map metric heads, okay, as a snapshot in time and confirm flow directions. But to get an idea as to the adequacy of the supply in the basin on a frequent basis, we just need to turn to our 2 indicator wells, and this is the well levels over time in our AHF indicator well. The blue dots are the observations, and the red line is the model simulation. And what this shows is that we would be in the upper part of the operating range with a median rainfall year. Now, with a drier year, we'll have lower levels, but still well above the minimum operating limit. And the same is true with the below the fault. So it's critical that the recharge ponds are critical then for not only the supply, but as we can see, the quality of groundwater in the basin with respect to salt. The rubber dams and the diversion pipes that bring water into the quarry lakes, of course, have been undergoing some capital projects over the last several years to repair them and to preserve their and upgrade them to preserve their diversion capacity and render them in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. A lot's been done, but just last year we completed the Rubber Dam 3 fish ladder, the fabric replacement. The Shin Pond fish screen was started last summer along with the Rubber Dam 1 fish ladder. Those 2 ladder projects will continue into next year, and their cost, along with other groundwater capital, is expected to bring the groundwater CIP to about $15.9 million. The rest of this is recurring imported water contract costs and expenses. Every item has been checked to make sure that only those items that benefit the groundwater basin are included, and that includes anything that helps the supply of groundwater, the reliability of the supply, and the quality. Nothing on the distribution system is in here for this calculation, for this analysis. And we look at revenue the same way. If we were a groundwater replenishment-only district, this is the revenue that we would have. So we start with A1. As we know, nothing we can do about this. The replenishment assessment rate for ag and municipal recreation is $8 an acre foot. Luckily, that production has been very steady over the years. The rest of the private pumping is subject to the variable rate, the adjustable rate, and so should staff concur, I should say, should the board concur with staff's recommendation for a 5.4% increase, that would bring the amount of revenue from this group to about $533,000. Pumping for the district's distribution system is evaluated at the same replenishment assessment rate to ensure fairness to the private pumpers. Then we come to the rest of the list here. We have the 1% tax, the State Water Project override tax, and grants of about $9.2 million to help offset the cost for the recharge facility projects. So our total then is still a little bit short. Well, it's still 1.7, it's not small, $1.7 million. Now, in lieu of proposing a sharper rate increase to zero out this balance, we've considered a multi-year cash flow approach in order to see if we can come up with a recommendation for a more moderate rate recommendation. And so we start with, go in the past, and we use actual revenues and actual costs that we've been realized, and then we project forward with the 25-year CIP and reasonable projections with, from expenses. And if we add up individual years surpluses and shortfalls, we would end up with a zero cumulative balance at the end of, within a reasonable period of time, at year 2033. And I'd like to thank the Finance Department for their guidance and their expertise in helping us pull this together. Gives us more confidence on our recommendation. Because the district did not raise rates for about 10 years, between 1997 and 2007, the year-over-year rate of increase to get to the proposed 485 would be 3.54%. And I'll just close on showing the replenishment assessment rates for the Valley Water District and the Orange County Water District. These two agencies are similar to ACWD in that they're both replenishing groundwater basins that are intensely utilized in urban settings. Valley Water's added 2 new charge zones. Orange County, we were unable to get their staff recommendation for 2021. So that's questions or comments.
Questions or comments from the board?
I have some questions.
Director Sethy?
Another wonderful presentation. I always look forward to this. It's the great analysis of our entire groundwater system. So let me ask a really nerdy question, if I may. You said there's 10,000 metric tons of solids that have been removed. About a little over a third of that is chloride.
Right.
What are the other solids?
Well, let's see. Sodium, sodium chloride.
Yeah.
Probably bicarbonate, calcium. So some of the hardness constituents that might be in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that would probably be the most. Obviously, that would probably be the main, I would say, of the various constituents, and it's just trace stuff. After that.
Magnesium.
Oh yeah,
manganese.
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 There's got manganese, magnesium, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That would certainly be part of it, but it's mostly calcium, bicarbonate, and then sodium and chloride would probably be the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, hydroxide and hydronium
Yeah.
ions, the H2O.
So when you're drawing things out, it's a collective molecule of things.
Right, and it's interesting in that the sodium chloride probably component is likely to go down while over the years, while the bicarbonate and the calcium is likely to be the greater dominant fraction. And that's the case as you get inland, because you have less of that seawater. So the chloride is kind of like the seawater ion that we go, anion that we go to.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So if you could go back a slide here on just a couple, one more, right there. So the spike that we're seeing around 2020, right here, is that entirely due to the fish ladders?
No, we have.
What is that spike?
Yeah, what it is you've got shin pond fish screens, okay, you've got rubber dam 1 fish ladder, and then we have the Vallecito's channel betterments, and we have also the Niles Cone, I got a list right here.
The Vallecito's channel
betterments at 1.3 million. Okay, so we have we've got the rubber dam 2 Larangier Fishway at 530,000, Niles Cone groundwater basin extraction well site evaluation, actually at 836,000. Rubber dam 1, includes a control building and equipment modifications at 1.239. Vallecito's channel betterments 1267, 1,267,000. And shin pond fish screens are 3.7 million. And rubber dam 1 fish ladder is 7.4 million. And then there are smaller things like Marnie Well in the thousands. Marnie Well construction project. There's a study for pit T2 rehabilitation at 29,000. Groundwater supply facilities improvement equipment replacements. Joint purified water feasibility evaluation. So some studies.
Okay,
That was a real construction.
I got it. So I have a question for the general manager.
Yes, sir.
I'm a customer of the water district. I paid my bill today.
Thank
It's
you.
only $112, by the way.
That's for 2 months.
For 2 months, yeah. And I have a large piece of property, too. What is the logic of, between the fish ladders and all the fish associated things and our groundwater charges? How are they connected?
Well, Alameda Creek is the way, the mechanism that we are able to recharge the groundwater basin. So costs associated with the management of the groundwater basin, either our customers pay their fair share of that, and that's the water supply that is produced as a result of our operation and management of the basin. The ones like you and I, who both buy water and get a water bill from ACWD. And then the private groundwater pumpers are also paying their fair share of these costs, because the water supply wouldn't be there for them to pump with wells if ACWD didn't manage it. So they pay their fair share in the replenishment assessment based on the acre feet that they pump, and our customers are paying their fair share as part of the overall the water costs, how costs are distributed amongst the typical customers that are hooked up to our system. So there's really kind of like a set of books that we keep on all the capital and operating costs associated with the management of the groundwater basin. And this is part of the Replenishment Assessment Act, and which requires us to do the accounting in a certain way. So the idea is that everybody pays their fair share, and that's the way it works. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Every once in a while, I need a reminder.
Yeah.
On this subject. So,
there is also, I probably should just stop talking once you are satisfied with the answer, but I can't help myself, and that is, there is the property tax component too. Every parcel of property sits essentially on top of the groundwater basin, so each property gets some benefit of the district having access to this groundwater basin, so that's why there's some property tax allocated, revenue allocated to this as well.
Okay, Mike, while you're still in the room, I want to mention something. So this is really under Director's Comments 7.4. I attended the Groundwater Resources Association conference last week in Monterey, and a lot of it was on the GSAs around California and how they're being managed, and everybody's getting into the data game right now and trying to statistically monitor what's going on in their groundwater basins, right? But one of the coolest things that I was observing were all the presentations on how people are graphically showcasing their groundwater systems. And it turns out just in the last year, really in this past year, all of the applications from artificial intelligence applications that are being applied to groundwater basins, and really cool stuff on picturing what's going on dynamically in your groundwater basin, and seawater intrusion, and replenishing your water, fresh water into the groundwater systems. So I would encourage you to look into all of that stuff. One gentleman, Gary Darling from Department of Water Resources, had planned on giving a lunchtime presentation on the AI applications, but he was not able to, wasn't able to make it because he not able to make the conference there at that time. But I did have a very in-depth conversation with him about AI, and he is going to send his presentation to me, which I will pass along to the staff.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
His name is Gary Darling, and he said that only last year at the Geotechnical Conference, International Geotechnical Conference in San Francisco, that was the first time he saw all of these AI applications for groundwater systems coming out. And so he put together his own presentation on this very subject. And I think it will be very intriguing for all of us to take a look at.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's great. Look forward to it.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Director
Briefly,
Gunther?
my wonderful report, I always look forward to this one, I think you know that. I would like to point out there the $8 municipal, and I know a lot of people have a heartburn with this, but the reality is, it's the cities. The cities are our customers, so who benefits from that difference? Our customers. So it's not really a big deal. I know some people consider it a big deal. It's not worth trying to change anything. It's there. It's in the rule. It's in the law. And the ones who benefit are the same people who are paying their bill. So we all live in the Tri-City. It's not like some of us don't live here and aren't benefiting from that same cost. And that's my view on that. I've had lots of times to think about it. I know there's been talk about it, but we need to keep it in perspective that we're all benefiting from it.
If I may just build upon your comments here, I think we need to look back at some of our directors here. For Patrick, two very important attorneys here for 40 years in the district history, Morris Hyman and Gene Rhodes, that were active in the formation of Fremont. Clark Redeker, founder of Newark. Frank Borghi, founder of Union City. All of these people back in the 50s had the foresight to say for the cities and our school districts and other beneficiaries, they would build in this long-term cost benefit to the communities that we have. And I think we really need to recognize the foresight that all of these forefathers had in our history.
All right. With any other questions or comments? Director Akbari.
Great presentation. I have a couple of questions. One on this slide while we're on it. In the out years, there's the second spike in the early 2030s.
Yeah.
What's the additional
The
cost?
last one, that might be another round of Vallecillo's channel betterments again.
Okay.
I think there was I have to look again at the numbers really closely, but I think there was a phase 2 of it, or it was expected to be another one of it. We could get back to you with that to check it and make sure. Yeah, it did occur to me too that it was quiet, and then all of a sudden there's this thing again.
Okay. Yeah. And then the second question I had about the solids that are extracted. What's the disposal procedure for those?
That's basically so it's treated at the desal facility. There's brine. And then there's some dilution water, I believe, that brings it down to a concentration that's acceptable to the Regional Water Quality Control Board for discharge into the bay. And so that's blend water for that. It goes out to a flood control channel.
Yeah, those are the questions I had. Thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. So with that, shall we move on to General Manager's report?
Comments?
Oh, comments. By all means. Sorry, sir.
Well, I'll go backwards. On the AI stuff, this stuff is just starting to appear everywhere. It's showing up applications in everything. And the interesting thing to note about this stuff is that the reason it's appearing now is because it didn't exist before about 2012. In 2012, a Canadian academic came up with this deep learning neural networks idea, and in the last few years, like 4 years or so, the number of jobs in artificial intelligence has gone up by a factor of 16. So this field is brand new and it's exploding. On prices, so we're always looking at prices. The thing that is missing from the water pricing is demand elasticity. If you raise your price by 10%, what does that do to demand? Nobody considers, they think it's a disaster if you raise the price too much, but, or if you raise it 100%, whatever. What is the elasticity of demand for your products? Because you're going to need to know that someday. If you ever really do have limited supplies and you ever really do have to manage demand, you can do it by just running around and ordering people to turn off, or you can do it through pricing, which is certainly the better way. Finally, on those graphs with the straight line and the dots were all lined up over time. That's a graph of, it's a linear graph over time. If you compare that to a coronavirus graph, to make that a linear graph and make it all nice and straight, you'd have to have a semi-log plot with the 10% per day or so, maybe more than that, 10% per day increase, and then it lines up really straight. That's the CAGRs apply to that. They apply to coronavirus. When you talk about compound growth rates, I'm just making a deep into the weeds mathematical point that you can't, when it's a straight line on a linear plot, that for you to use the phrase, so much % per year, you would have to be having an exponential growth or an exponential decline curve. It doesn't work mathematically to do a CAGR on a straight line on a linear plot. It works great on coronavirus. 10% per day. Watch out. Bye-bye.
Mr. Abreu, I would like to provide a real quick comment. First of all, on the elasticity of demand.
What is it?
And I was a student of economics and business administration, so if you're talking about California Water or a private water company or San Jose Water, you can charge a certain amount under the purview of the California Utility Commission, right? We are a public agency. We are ruled by Proposition 218, passed by the voters, including you. And we are limited to charging only the cost of delivering the water to our customers. We cannot charge at liberty, like a private corporation, whatever we want for the product that we deliver. And really, that's so fundamental to our industry, the water industry throughout California. I would ask you not to attack the water district here, ACWD, but turn to your state legislators if you have a gripe about this. This is the law that California voters passed.
It's like Marxism. When you don't have enough supply, for whatever reason, you either have to ration it, which is crazy, or you have to raise the prices.
You can only charge the cost of...
I think this is a great discussion. So, Kelly, I would invite you to join us when we have our rate workshop. It actually would be great if you could come and participate and have this discussion with us, and perhaps we could share information and exchange ideas. So I am sure you're on our distribution list, so keep your eye out for our workshops. So, sure. So actually, before the general manager's report, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Is that okay? Yeah. So let's be back at, let's make it coming back at 7:35. How's that? Back to order. So next item up is general manager's report.
Thank you, Madam President. We have a number of items for the board this evening that we hope you find interesting and informative. And the first one is an update on water quality sampling for something called PFAS. And as you are aware, Per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, collectively known as PFAS, have received attention as forever chemicals, which are persistent in the environment as well as the human body. There is evidence that exposure to these chemicals can lead to adverse health effects, and not surprisingly, concerns have been raised in the media, and PFAS has been the subject of recent books and movies and documentaries. And additionally, staff is aware that some concerns have been raised in the community. So Water Production Manager Mike Wickham and our Manager of Operations and Maintenance, Kurt Arens, are here to discuss the current regulatory framework for PFAS. And additionally, staff is planning to perform some supplemental testing for PFAS and ACWD's water supplies that go above and beyond the current regulatory requirements. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to make sure that the board is informed about PFAS as well as our plans, and then to receive any input that you may have. So with that, I will introduce Kurt Renz, our Water Operations and Maintenance Manager.
May I ask a question before we start?
Yes, sir.
Because I've had customers ask me this. What is distinguish between PFAS and PFOS?
Hold that thought.
Okay.
Mr. Wickham will explain that in probably his first or second slide.
Okay, great.
Yeah, hopefully we'll answer your question.
All right.
And good evening, Madam President, members of the board, members of the public. Welcome. Yes, we just want to give you a quick update on our sampling plan that we're endeavoring to undertake. As General Manager has indicated, there's lots of chemicals in the system, in our environment, more being created every day. So it's something that we have to deal with. It's one of the biggest challenges probably going forward that a lot of agencies will be dealing with is emerging contaminants and how to manage these chemicals, what they mean to our water supply, to our customers. So we've been looking at this for quite a while. There is a regulatory process, obviously, to address chemicals in the system. That takes time, and oftentimes, as indicated, these chemicals get a life of their own, whether it's through the media, through public interest, whether it's chrome-6, perchlorate, you go the years, like every year, cytotoxins. There's always some new chemical constituent contamination that we're addressing. This one, PFAS, has come to light just recently. We've been studying this for quite a while. And it's important that we look at this when we're looking at a sampling plan. We don't take this lightly. There's lots of issues to consider and also potential consequences going forward. So we just want to kind of inform the board of what we're planning to do and also help you realize kind of what the potential outcomes could be so everybody knows what to expect, and we'll move forward from that. So I'm going to introduce Mike Wickham, our production manager, who will help provide a little more information about PFAS and PFOA and hopefully answer your question, as well as describe in more detail our proposed sampling plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So PFAS, or per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. PFAS or PFAS is essentially the name for the group, the general group or family of those substances. And there's about 6,300 of them. Just kind of skip to the bottom of the slide. The PFOA is a perfluorooctanic acid. That's one type of PFAS, one compound. And the other one that we're most interested in right now is perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS. So there's those three little abbreviations, PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS, are probably the ones you're going to hear the most about. So they're a group of man-made chemicals that are specifically designed to be heat, oil, and water resistant. So they're also designed to last pretty much forever. So they're called forever chemicals. They don't degrade very well. They're used in the manufacturing of a lot of consumer goods. We have some of the types of products listed up there. Bristle care products, firefighting foam, nonstick cookware, Teflon. They're used in industrial products. So they're very prevalent in our consumer goods. They're currently unregulated, but they do have some potential negative health effects, including reproductive effects, immunological effects, and potential carcinogens. Like I mentioned, they're currently unregulated, but there has been significant regulatory activity on them in the last several years. In 2008, the EPA approved a method to test for PFAS. That's method 537, and it could test for 14 different types of PFAS.
In 2009, they issued provisional lifetime health advisories for PFOA and PFOS. And PFOA and PFOS are significant because those were the two types of PFAS found to be most prevalent. And then in 2013, between 2013 and 2015, water systems monitored for them under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule number 3. And they tested for 6 PFASs during that cycle. And then in 2016, the lifetime health advisory was established at 70 parts per trillion for a sum of PFOA and PFOS. And then in 2018, they developed a method to test for even more of these chemicals. This method 537.1 can test for 18 of them. In 2019, the EPA developed a PFAS action plan. And then just last month, in February of 2020, EPA announced a preliminary determination to regulate both PFOA and PFOS. Additionally, and this was planned before the preliminary determination was announced, they had already planned to be monitoring for a group of PFAS chemicals during the unregulated contaminant rule 5 monitoring, which is scheduled for 23 to 25 for the monitoring cycle. So in California, the regulatory history, there's also been significant activity since 2016. So in 2016, the Division of Drinking Water issued follow-up actions for water agencies that had reported detections of over 70 parts per trillion for the UCMR3 monitoring. And then in 2017, PFOA and PFOS were added to the Proposition 65 list, which contains chemicals that are known to suspected to cause cancer or have reproductive or birth defects. And then in 2018, the notification levels were established separately for PFAS and PFOA at 13 and 14 parts per trillion, with a combined 70 parts for both was set as a response level. And then in 2019, so just last year, the Division of Drinking Water began a phased investigation into PFAS prevalence and occurrence. They issued monitoring orders to select water agencies, and they issued those orders based on the results of their monitoring for the UCMR3 testing and also their proximity to known potential sources of PFAS contamination, including landfills and airports with firefighting response sites. And they expanded that investigation later in the year to include primary manufacturing facilities, airports without fire training areas, and urban wildfire areas and refineries. In July, Assembly Bill 756 was signed into law. That bill gave the Division of Drinking Water the authority to order water agencies to monitor for PFAS compounds, and it also prescribed specific actions to be taken if there were detections. And then the notification level was lowered in August of last year to 5.1 and 6.5 parts per trillion. And then in February, again, just last month, they established response levels for PFAS and PFOA. So PFAS testing. PFAS, to test for it, you use a solid phase extraction method with liquid chromatology and chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry, excuse me, it's a mouthful. Those testing methods are some we don't have available at ACWD in our in-house labs, so we have to contract out to get that done. And the method that, one of the methods, the more recent method approved in 2018 is 537.1, tests for 18 compounds. And the sampling protocol, because there's very low reporting and response levels for this contaminant in these tests, so these response levels at 5 parts per trillion, or these notification levels at 5 parts per trillion, and these response levels at 10 parts per trillion, those are very, very low levels. Most of the contaminants we monitor for and take action on are measured in parts per million or parts per billion, so obviously much higher concentrations. Also with the prevalence of PFAS in the environment, in all the consumer goods we use and personal care products we use, clothing we wear, adhesive tapes we use, almost everything we use. There's a lot of potential for cross-contamination during sampling. So there's some really prescriptive or restrictive sampling protocols need to be observed to prevent the introduction of PFAS contamination by the sampler or during the sampling process. Because like I mentioned, it's made in Teflon includes it, so a lot of the equipment we use for sampling as well as a lot of the safety gear we use when sampling even includes PFAS. The labels we put on sampling containers can contain it. So there's a lot of restrictions for sampling. So what have we done? What we've done is, in 2014, we conducted sampling for under UCMR 3, and at that time we sampled all of the entry points in our distribution system, and we had no PFAS detections for the 6 compounds, including PFOS and PFOA. There were no detections. However, the reporting limits for those tests were higher than they are today. When we conducted the monitoring in 2014, the reporting limits were 40 parts per trillion and 20 parts per trillion. Today's tests, the reporting limits are as low as 2 parts per trillion, so a much lower reporting limit. Additionally, the tests, the response levels are even at 40 parts per trillion, 10 parts per trillion. Also, we were not identified during the phase PFAS investigation, so none of our sources of water are in the vicinity of a suspected or identified source of PFAS contamination. We have closely tracked the regulatory development of PFAS. Specifically, again, just last month, 2 significant things happened. One is that the EPA announced a preliminary determination to regulate those 2 compounds. And additionally, our Division of Drinking Water established the response levels for those 2 compounds. We've also had some public interest and some media inquiries regarding PFAS compounds. We have put information on our website to provide information about PFAS. And we've also been communicating closely with our neighboring agencies who have been conducting PFAS monitoring to evaluate how their sampling's been going, and what kind of success they've had with their sampling protocols, what kind of results they've received. Specifically, we're looking for, if they've had any issues with cross-contamination. So here's kind of a summary of what some of the other agencies have done near us. East Bay Mud has began a voluntary monitoring at their treatment plants. SFPUC conducted a one-time sampling of multiple locations at their sources and in their distribution system even. Some agencies, like Valley Water Zone 7 and San Jose Water, were issued monitoring orders for their wells based on the Division of Drinking Water phased investigation. But in addition to those, so they've monitored according to those orders, they've also conducted additional voluntary monitoring that they've done beyond the scope of those. And then some agencies haven't done any monitoring aside from the monitoring required by UCMR 3. So what's our plan? So even though we don't have any sources of potential PFAS contamination identified, and we didn't have any detections during UCMR 3, since the detection levels then were higher than the detection levels, or the reporting levels now, we plan to sample one time to verify of all of our sources and our distribution system entry points to verify that there is no PFAS in our wells specifically, but in our source water and in the water provided to our customers. We think this would be a move that's protective of public health. Our plan is to sample the 16 production wells to feed the blending facility, the 5 source wells for the Newark desalination facility, 3 entry points to the distribution system, which is post-treatment. So all of our wells have a treatment process between them and the customer. So the entry points to the distribution system represent post-treatment locations. We also plan to just sample our source water, our surface water plant, and the San Francisco water that's provided to the blending facility. We plan to use an external sampling service with prior PFAS sampling experience to minimize any chance of cross-contamination. And we also plan to use a subcontract lab for analysis. And we anticipate the sampling will begin late spring or early summer. So though we don't anticipate detecting any, if we do detect PFAS, there's some actions we'll require to take, and this is the action plan. If we have a confirmed detection of PFAS, we'll have to report it in our Consumer Confidence Report, so it'll go in next year's Consumer Confidence Report. If any of those detections are above the notification level, then we'll have to notify the city councils of the Tri-Cities and the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. If any of those detections are above the response level, then we'll have to remove the source from service, install treatment, or provide public notification within 30 days, and we'll also report that in our consumer confidence report. So, are there any questions?
Any questions or comments from the board?
I have a couple. One, I don't want to say that I don't believe there's a concern, but I get a little bit the firefighting foam aspect of this. I was a Coast Guard engineer and damage control assistant. Very, very familiar with firefighting foam. It is absolutely one of the best things you have for a shipboard fire. And my fear is that we're going to demonize this stuff to the point, and the people demonizing it have no idea of what it's used for and the benefit of having this stuff. They didn't have a triple F in World War II. They didn't have it in Korea. I'm not even 100% sure we had much of it around during Vietnam. It's a relatively new stuff. They were still using mechanical foam when I went in. So I just wanted to point out, you talk about firefighting foam, so what? Anybody involved in shipboard firefighting, it is so what? It's important. And I'm sure at the airports, it's also important, vitally important. So this is not something that somebody made so that they could sell it and make a profit. I'm sure they did, and I'm sure they profited. But for anybody involved in shipboard firefighting out there, and I don't think anybody in this room is, I want to tell you, this is important to them. That's all I wanted to say on it. I'm sure we're going to have to monitor it and check on it, I get it. But I wanted to point out, it's mentioned in there. I know some of the things came from facilities where they were training with it. That stuff is vital. And I don't know if there's much better other than maybe halon. But even halon doesn't work that well if you've got an open oil fire going out there. This is that stuff they throw down on it that's white, looks like soap, smothers out the fire, and puts it out. Without it, good luck. So I just wanted to point that out. This stuff it's not something that, it's nice to have. Yeah, it's nice to have if you're not on a ship. If you're on a ship, it's not a nice to have thing. You want to have it. My only comment.
Thank you, Director Gunther. Director Sethy?
You mentioned that there's over 6,000 chemicals in the environment, and it's so hard to even comprehend that as a consumer. And it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily just go into water, it goes into all of our environment, everything that we're dealing with. A couple of questions. How different are the regulations between the national EPA and Cal EPA? Which is stronger?
Right now, California's is tighter. California's notification levels, response levels are tighter. But the notification level, actually I'm right here. The response level for California is 10 parts for PFOA or 40 for PFOS or 70 for combined, right? The federal, they said there's no, And there's no MCL set for any of this yet. This is still in the regulatory process, right? So what we have is, on the state level, we have the notification and response levels. At the federal level, we have the health advisory, right? So those are kind of the two levels we have. And the federal is combined of both, some of those of 70, and the state is an individually of 10 and 40. So the state is tighter, sir.
Mm-hmm. Are there, sorry about my insufficiency in asking the right question maybe, but are there many chemicals in the PFOA and the PFOS? We're not just measuring one or two, right?
So, that's an excellent question, sir. And the answer so PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, I believe, is one chemical. I don't believe it's a family. I think that's one of the compounds. And PFOS, perfluorooctane sulfonate, is another one of the compounds. And there's up to 6,300 of these individual compounds, of which the method we're proposing to test with can measure 18 different types. And I don't know that I brought a list of all those types, but they all have.
No, you don't need to bring that out right here. But are there standards set by AWWA on these?
As far as for the testing or for...
Yeah, I do not believe AWWA has it.
Mm-hmm.
None that I'm aware of, sir.
What would be the standard that we would look to as a district for measuring these compounds?
As far as like to do the sampling and analysis?
Yeah.
The guidance?
Mm-hmm.
So what we would look to, sorry, I didn't totally understand the question. There is sampling guidance that's been issued by the Division of Drinking Water. And that guidance, the other agencies that have been doing the sampling have either followed that guidance directly or developed guidance very similar to it off of that guidance. So there is guidance there set by the California Water Resource Control Board, Division of Drinking Water.
Are any of the compounds that we're measuring pharmaceutical related?
These,
like pharmaceutical products getting into the water supply?
Yeah, these are not so much from, not pharmaceutical per se, but the personal care products, yes. So there's, I'm not aware of them being used in pharmaceutical manufacturing.
So this is actually a family of compounds that have very similar chemical structure. So they have multiple uses. It is conceivable they are in pharmaceutical compounds, but I think latest study, most of it have been pointing more towards personal care products. That doesn't say it doesn't exist, because this is literally a family of chemicals with similar chemical structure. Perfluorinated means you have many fluorine in an organic chain. So it could literally be many things, like Teflon to firefighting foam.
Are we talking about cosmetics, paint?
They are even in things like soup can, I think coatings, I believe they are from Scotch Guard in the coating in your toothpaste, so it'll come out. It's in multiple different uses. That's very surprising.
So I was really surprised to see on your first couple of slides the stain-resistant carpeting, because I just made a purchase of 700 square feet of stain-resistant carpeting to replace old carpeting in my home from Lowe's, and they didn't tell me anything about this.
So my advice is not to consume it.
Can I walk on it?
Yeah, I think it's probably okay, but don't lick it. Don't do that. This stuff is on a lot of different products. It's no longer manufactured in the USA, but it's imported in other products.
I mean, I said, stain resistant, that's cool. I'll pay a premium for it.
So, just to supplement the conversation where I'm thinking it might go, and so there's thousands and thousands of unregulated chemicals in the environment. And just with, ACWD staff considering, going outside of the regulatory framework for this one family of chemicals is a big deal because, there's different testing protocols that you can choose from. We're following the examples of others. But the reality is that the regulatory community is moving probably too slow for the chemicals that are in the environment. And so ACWD staff is working in other forums to try to accelerate that process, or at least make it so it's not regulation by legislation, because what's happening now is that somebody writes a book or has some concern about a particular substance, and people get excited about it, maybe rightfully so, and go to their legislators who want to do something that's helpful, and they write laws to regulate this substance that may or may not reflect the best science available, and may sort of move that chemical substance up to the top of the chart for potential future regulation when it may not pose the greatest hazard. So we, staff at ACWD, are working with our colleagues at the California Urban Water Agencies to try to come up with a way to allow sort of the best science and for the water industry to kind of supplement the regulation that the EPA and the State Water Resources Control Board does, because the current system, it's not as effective as it probably needs to be. And in another arena, I know that Metropolitan Water District of Southern California is introducing a bill that's going to propose sort of a panel that would be appointed to help expedite this process too, outside of the political sort of environment that's in its infancy in terms of the legislative session. So this is a small subset of a much bigger issue, and the other discussion that is going on is potentially linking any of the costs associated with addressing these chemicals and the health impacts back to the original manufacturers. But right now, the only way you can do that is through litigation, like what was done with, say, MTBE in some states. So our goal here is to do a sort of one-off, additional testing for a class of compounds that we know there's a lot of anxiety about out there. But, this is just to get some experience doing this and looking at the issues outside of the sort of the safety of the regulatory framework. But there's potential ramifications too. As Mr. Wickham explained, it's very easy to contaminate a sample. If we get false positives, we test again. If it happens again, now we've got a notification requirement. And if that happens, we may find ourselves in a position where we have to go to the next level. And the next level may be something as simple as not using a well for a while, right? But it could be something as big as having to build a brand new treatment system, like perhaps a GAC system at our blending facility or a reverse osmosis system or something of that nature. So the question that we were grappling with as staff is, is it better to not know, or and some water agencies, I'm sure, are grappling with that. But we felt, since there has been some concerns raised, it doesn't mean that we'll do the same thing for any constituent. But in this case, since there is future regulations coming down the pipe, that it would be very difficult to be explaining to the community, if we do the additional sampling in the 2023 timeframe, you could have known in 2020 and you chose not to. So we decided that the prudent measure as staff, because protection of public health is our number one charge, that we would go ahead and do the additional sampling. And I really want to compliment our operations staff, because when we talked about this initially, it's like, what? But they looked into it, and they came up with a plan that I think is really solid. And we feel as staff that we just want to move forward and do this.
I think it's very important that we're addressing this subject in a community forum here. And I have to admit, as a consumer and somebody who's been involved with water for a long time, I only heard about these things really on the real periphery of the industry. And it feels like all of a sudden this huge wave has come over the industry on this subject. And I was made more aware of it at the Groundwater Resources Association conference last week, where they have scheduled for the first time a statewide conference in Sacramento for the end of April, inviting in all of these national and international people to talk on this subject. So it's hitting the industry, I feel like out of the blue.
Yeah, so CEC's constituents of emerging concern have been sort of the talk of the town over the last few years, but I think you're right. Your sense is it is amping up, and probably rightfully so. And we're not here to demonize any particular chemical or anything like that. I just think that the chemical manufacturers are in the business to make money. They come up with new compounds with that in mind, and those compounds get used in the environment, without necessarily understanding what the full life cycle impacts of those chemicals might be down the road. And, personally, I feel that a little more attention to that, and then maybe something like PFAS use in firefighting foam is considered, the benefits outweigh the cost, but to put it in everything that we possibly use, might be a little too much. So, it's a much broader subject that we're not going to be able to, cover every nuance about, but we did feel that this was important to bring to your attention. And since we're going outside the sort of safety net of the regulatory envelope, there could be, we hope not, but there could be consequences.
I support going outside like you're doing. Like you said, it's an item. I think the other thing we have to keep in perspective too is why, people say, why didn't you do this before? 5 parts per trillion. Sampling capabilities today are so much phenomenally better than they were 20 years ago. So, this, like you said, what's next?
Yeah, and because of that, we're finding stuff that we didn't know was there.
So if I could just follow up. So first of all, to address the pharmaceutical issue, I did a quick search. So PFAS compounds are mainly used because they are resistant to heat, water, and oil. So based on that, it is unlikely that it's used as medicinal, but it probably could be associated with pharmaceutical compound through the packaging, just like food. So that is one way to answer your question. But in terms of why it's sudden ramped up, I think probably it's because in other states that also start with a C, they are actually detecting PFAS at really high levels, to the point where the water purveyors actually have to provide bottled water and alternative water source, and they're actually seeing health effects. This is not a brand new chemical, just by the fact that we did a monitoring run in UCMR3 a few years ago. I think it suddenly becomes so important because of those communities that's being impacted.
What is it? Where are those communities?
They're in Colorado, near Colorado Springs, and they're little towns that's adjacent. I think one is next to Peace Air Force Base. There are all these towns that's adjacent to Air Force bases where their groundwater are actually being impacted, and high level of PFAS compounds are actually found in those waters. And yeah, one could have a discussion about the health effect, the linkage to groundwater. Those are still discussion with the local health department, and they have their own findings. But because of the high detection in those groundwater for those communities, there are actual replacement water being brought in. So that's why I think that's where you're seeing California starting to pay a lot of attention because of that. But this is not something new, as in suddenly just come on scene. ECMR3 did start looking at it because there were concerns.
And, yeah, there is a recent book called Troubled Water, too, where there's communities downstream of DuPont plants that have experienced pretty bad situations. If you get a chance to read that book, it might get you irritated as somebody who takes their responsibility to protect public health very seriously. But the book also raises some good points to think about. It's written by a gentleman named Sethy.
I do have
Director Akbari?
one question. So we've kind of alluded to this a little bit in your comments about the changing regulatory environment and in Bob's comments about how this chemical isn't manufactured in the United States anymore. Is there a move within industries to move away from PFAS and the related chemicals? Is this something that maybe in future years we might not have to worry as much about?
Sir, I'm really not sure. I'll start.
Yeah, well, I was going to share thoughts. I think the challenge with the chemicals are, like, they don't make Teflon anymore, but they just move to different compounds. That's why there's over 6,000 different PFAS compounds.
They don't make Teflon anymore?
Not for the applications, right? Yeah, please.
So these 6,300 roughly chemicals are in the same family, all share similar characteristics. So when they move away from one, they replace it with another that's a different formulation, maybe a different length of chain, but essentially does the same thing. So that's why I don't know that, it's going to be kind of consumer behavior for these properties and products that drives the manufacture or the creation of these chemicals to create the product.
So it means Ronald Reagan was the last Teflon president, right?
Director Akbari?
Was the move to not manufacture this chemical in the United States because of the changing regulatory environment, or was it purely just the globalization?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. I don't know what drove it, whether it was the regulatory or the global, because both of those happened about the same time.
Okay.
Depending if you watch some of the movies, there's a documentary as well. But The Devil We Know and the movie Black Waters, those are all about this issue. And it kind of implies, kind of the risks. Legal risks get too great, so they move to something else.
Yeah. And the other
It's not
concern is,
regulatory at this point.
and the other concern is considered a forever chemical.
Right.
So it's very persistent. It doesn't break down. So whatever's out there is likely going to stay out there for a while.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions from the board? No? Member of the public? Mr. Alburu?
So one of the things that's been changing lately is the toxicity understanding, the studies. So there's a lot more understanding now about the biochemical, biological effects of these things. This documentary that he mentioned, they were playing that last December, a couple months ago, in downtown Livermore. And those people in Livermore, a lot of them are very technical, and they know when they see this stuff on the movies, they actually understand it. With the practicing the firefighter foam, this is just like any other product on the market, and there's different levels of usage, right? So if you restrict the usage somehow through price or other means, you can always get People will tell you, oh, no, I need whatever, gasoline. But when you raise the price enough, they'll reduce their usage of gasoline. People tell you they can't live without water, but if you raise the price enough, they'll reduce the usage of water. That's the elasticity of demand. So if they stop using the foam every week for practice and only use it occasionally or use something else, fake foam or whatever, they can figure out something to reduce their usage. And that might be, for sure that will happen. Orange County has a lot of wells. 1/3 of their wells are slated for shutdown this year because of this. I don't know if that's still their plan, but they were thinking about shutting down a large portion of their wells. This plan that we just saw, I like it. I think it's a good plan. The only things I would suggest is repeating this thing. Maybe, for example, Zone 7 is repeating their testing quarterly. Maybe you don't need it retested. Maybe every, year or two or something. Come back and redo this and just show that you have an ongoing program and you have a baseline and you keep doing it. Maybe it costs too much to do it every day or whatever. But in Zone 7, they have a well that was producing at 70 to 100 parts per trillion. Over 70, I think it was 70 or 100. They said that they were going to use it last, but they were still using it. They were blending it in with the others. And what happens when you blend in Zone 7? I was there for their report. They get their overall level down to something like 30. 30. That's enormous by these standards over here. So they have to do notification, or I don't know what they're doing. They're doing notification, probably doing other things. Orange County has spent $1.4 million to do testing to figure out how to remove this stuff. That was just for testing, not for the actual treatment. So getting rid of this stuff is not going to be cheap. And then, let me see, where is it? Okay, so in 7, we already talked about that. They're repeating testing quarterly. East Bay Mud, they haven't tested anything at the new lower levels, but they are saying, and I heard this from, I actually looked it up on the website, they're going to start testing this year. They don't have any real results yet and then finally, SFPUC, they tested in 2019, their results are under 2. That was their detection limit, they're under 2. So if you find SFPUC water is over 2 or very high, then they're lying. You guys are going to be double checking their results pretty soon. And you should get your money back because they told you that their product was so good and it's not that good. Or anyway, so that's it. I think this is a good plan and just need to do it more. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions, comments from the board? Hearing none, thank you very much for the presentation and the great sampling plan and answering all my questions in the community. All right, with that, yes, you have the preview of draft water supply video, General Manager?
Yes. So you may recall, directors, that back in the budget period, when we were budgeting for various allocations and expenses, that one of you suggested that ACWD become imaginative in some sort of public outreach effort. And so Shireen Gonzalez is here. So after that meeting, we brainstormed and we came up with an idea that Shireen has taken 100% of the lead on to have a video produced that will help our customers understand better where their water comes from.
I'm the guilty board member.
And you probably looked at your colleagues, and we looked at everybody, and it felt like this would be something that would be supported. So sometimes we read between the lines as staff, and that's what we did. And so Shireen has taken the lead, and we've made a video which is still not 100% complete. We know there's a couple of little issues in it. We'll see if you can find them. But the intent is not to have a lot of feedback from the board on this particular video because production is basically 99% complete. The intent is, should we make another one and you have suggestions, should we think about moving forward? But we're very proud and excited to show you the video, and Shireen has a few words to share before the grand preview of ACWD's first video that I'm aware of since our 75th anniversary video that goes over this material. And if you're interested, we have the 75th anniversary video. It's about 30 minutes. We accomplish in this new video what that one did in 30 minutes in about 5 minutes. So it's pretty amazing.
Great, thank you, Mr. Shaver. Good evening, board, staff, and member of the public. I'm excited to be here tonight, as Mr. Shaver mentioned, to showcase to you a project that I've been working on for the last several months, a water supply reliability video. And believe it or not, I'm actually glad to be one of the last presenters this evening because I think it's a nice snapshot of much of the work that my colleagues in the district do. It's a 5.5-minute video that really showcases to our customers and the community about water supply reliability, and I believe it answers a lot of questions, and it's certainly questions that I get asked when I'm out in the community, and that's, where does my water come from, and is my tap water safe to drink? So I imagine that you may get those questions as well, and I think that this video really does a good job of covering that and much more in the 5.5 minutes. Just a little bit of background. Mr. Shaver covered some of these points, but I'd also just like to reiterate that he and I reviewed our communication plan and current tools, and we wanted a medium that could reach people in a format that's convenient, easily accessible at their fingertips. Also, some board members did mention expressed interest in staff creating something new or different than what we've done before. And although a video isn't groundbreaking, it is renewed because the last video is over 30 years old. And to kind of put it into perspective, it's on VHS tape. So I'd say that it's hardly easily accessible, and it's a little outdated. Mr. Shaver and I landed on the idea of a water supply reliability video to help communicate the district's mission and strategic goals. An RFQ was issued, and we secured the services of a professional video production company. The video was produced to be educational with a multi-year shelf life, so we opted for on-air talent and narration rather than interviews, and you'll see that. Regarding electronic media use, it allows viewers to have easy access, so it's available at their fingertips. We know that people want things that are convenient and readily available. Also, the district is moving more toward a digital age with our use of electronic bill payment presentment, our website redesign, the expanded use of our social media, and also our water clip student video contest that we'll be presenting to you in May. The use of the video, because it is available at the click of a button, we imagine that it could be used in a variety of ways, and some thoughts are that it would be posted to our social media and certainly on our website. The link could be shared with key stakeholders. It could be posted to public access channels, and we've reached out to some trying to secure that. Certainly shared with educators, played before community meetings if it's appropriate, shown before facility tours when we give tours of TP2, and because the final product will include closed captioning, we can air it in our lobby as well when sound isn't available. So the video that you'll be seeing tonight is in draft form. It has been reviewed by executive staff and public affairs staff, so we recognize there is the need for some edits and corrections, and as Bob mentioned, maybe you can point some of those out. So I would like to ask if I could take your comments and feedback at the end of the video. Also would like to note that the final video will include closed captioning, and it will also have a 30-second teaser or a preview, so that will allow us to post it to our social media as well. And I would have brought popcorn, but it's not allowed in the boardroom, so please enjoy the video. Thank you.
Water sustains us. It's so reliable, many of us may not give it a second thought. But just imagine where we'd be without it.
At the Alameda County Water District, providing your water is our work. It's a job we've done for more than 100 years. And as you're about to see, there's more to getting water to the tap than you probably realize.
From the very beginning, ACWD has protected local water supplies. The district was formed back in 1914 to manage local groundwater a foundation of the Tri-City area, then, now, and in the future. Our team is proud to deliver high-quality, reliable water at a reasonable cost to more than 350,000 homes and businesses in Fremont, Newark, and Union City. Your water takes quite a journey, traveling through a vast delivery system of reservoirs and storage tanks, pump stations and treatment facilities, and more than 900 miles of pipeline. So, where does all of that water come from? Well, a good portion of it is pumped from right beneath your feet. There are few resources as vital to the Tri-City area as the Alameda Creek watershed. This vast watershed spans approximately 700 miles, and the source of all of our local supplies begins here. Behind the upper watershed, 10% of our total water supply is stored at Lake Del Valle. Locally, rainwater runoff is captured behind our inflatable rubber dams and diverted to Quarry Lake. Water slowly percolates into the ground, recharging the Niles Cone groundwater basin that accounts for 30% of your water supply. Protecting this entire watershed for future generations is critical for people and the environment. We are part of a major fish passage project on Alameda Creek, easing access for the endangered Central California coast steelhead. Our region has transformed from agriculture to cities. To meet the area's evolving needs, our leaders knew they needed to secure additional water supplies, and they did. Another 40% of your water flows through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, delivered via the South Bay Aqueduct as part of the massive State Water Project, which supplies water to 2/3 of California. The remaining 20% of your water comes all the way from Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park.
Like our state itself, California water is constantly evolving, and ACWD is no different. Here at the Newark Desalination Facility, such thinking turned an age-old problem into a new source of water.
In the early 1900s, salt water from the San Francisco Bay seeped into the underground aquifer when too much groundwater was pumped out. ACWD has monitored wells for seawater intrusion since the district was founded. Starting in the 1970s, ACWD began pumping some of that salt water back to the bay. But we found a better approach. This plant was built to remove salt from brackish groundwater using reverse osmosis to turn it into a high-quality water source. This was the first desalination plant of its kind in Northern California. Meanwhile, this facility, our water treatment plant number 2, uses state-of-the-art technology to treat water from the Delta. As part of a multi-step process, ACWD uses ozone to disinfect the water. We were one of the first agencies in the United States to use that method.
All of these different sources of water and cutting-edge technology increase flexibility, reliability, and save customers money. And that's no accident. ACWD is always looking for what's new, so it can be prepared for what's next.
As Californians, we know serious challenges are looming. Climate change, extreme drought, and increasing demands on our water supply, driven by new regulations and a growing population. We also know future generations need a resilient water supply to thrive. That's why ACWD is focused on using water wisely, implementing new technologies to improve efficiency, long-term water supply planning, and collaborating with our community and partners to solve big issues together.
So that's a look at all the work behind your water. So the next time you turn on your tap, you'll know there's a whole team behind the scenes making sure it's there when you need it, and it always will be.
Questions, comments?
That was really good. I
appreciate that. I think our customers will too. It's a really good tool available to our community.
Yeah, it was excellent. I really like it. If I might make a little editorial comment, I would try to highlight Oroville Dam, Oroville Lake, image-wise, a little bit more in the video, since that's where 40% of our water's coming from. Maybe the conveyance through the delta might help people understand. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's just so much information to share. It's hard to cover everything.
Yeah.
One thing we probably will change is we wanted to definitely get the Del Val Dam in the video because the district is considering potentially an investment. And so the editors decided to have that be 10% of our water supply. We don't usually look at it that way, so we'll fix that. That was one issue that I expected to hear about. We'll take input, but we're 99% there, so it's going to be hard to change.
I thought it was a sneak preview of at the N3 Ranch.
That's a different video, I'm afraid. We'll have to get Sam Elliott.
There's one historical photo that I liked in there, and I just want to highlight it for a moment. It had Matt Whitfield, general manager of the district, with dark hair. Up there, he's with white hair. And
hair is overrated.
And Director Peel, one of my favorite directors in our history, with one of our employees, Leonard Silva. And they are at the installation of the first fire hydrant in Warm Springs, which stands in front of Warm Springs Elementary School still today. So if you want to track down the very first fire hydrant when we had only, for the most part, volunteer fire departments around here.
Right.
That's the first one.
Okay.
Thank you. Director Akbari, no? Okay, Director Gunther?
No, it's great.
Good. I do have a question.
Sure.
How much bandwidth does that require? That's a really nice video, but the concept is people could watch it on the computer. Could they watch it on their mobile device?
I actually was able to load it easily on my mobile device.
I was recently on a vacation in Oregon, and we just had Wi-Fi, not the greatest service, where we were staying in a condo with a bunch of friends. And I showed them the video because I wanted their reaction to it, and it worked fine.
Good. No, because usually really pretty videos, sometimes it's so huge that...
Yeah, you can adjust the resolution,
good.
too, depending on your browser.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I believe...
We're going to be embedding it on our website somewhere, or?
Yes.
Okay, where on the website?
We haven't determined where yet. We do have a Your Water button that talks about water supply, conservation, and so forth, so I imagine that's probably where it will be.
As long as we highlight it, because I think it's a great piece that we should definitely show off.
Thank you.
Could we put this on our community channel?
We have reached out to see if that's an option. We haven't received confirmation yet. I don't know if the full-length video will be. Maybe we might have more luck with a 30-second video, but we have reached out. So maybe once they see it, they will
Because
be able
they
to
have a lot of blank time on that community channel, so we could fill in.
And I believe we have a comment or question from our community member. You need to be close since we're being videoed. The mic won't pick up on that part.
I like it, but I heard that there's a 30-second version, and that was my suggestion. Put up graphics, subject graphics, also the logo of the organization, and also make 30 or 90-second, slice and dice it, and do several subjects. This subject, same thing. Just slice it and dice it in a couple of different subjects, and because nowadays people, they have really short attention spans.
Thank you. And thank you for the video. Thank you. All right, next item is General Manager, you have 643 American Public Works Association Award.
Yes, I'd like to keep the good vibe going. Mr. Stevenson, our Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, would like to share a recent award that the district received.
Well, there's no way I can top the last topic, but I do want to share some good news, and that is that the district recently received an award from the American Public Works Association for our Rubber Dam Number 3 fishway and fabric replacement project, which was completed last year, as you know, from the Northern California chapter of the American Public Works Association. So I'll show it to the public first. Uh-oh, we just lost our... Well, to those simulated public participants, and I'll pass it around to the board so you can have a look at it.
Thank you.
It's glass, and it's been handled by many people, so you have your disinfectant in front of you. The award is in the category of construction projects over $5 million and less than $25 million in the environmental category. There were 18 different agencies that nominated 20 different projects for these awards. There were multiple categories. Environment was one of the categories. And having received this award, now the district is automatically nominated for the national award in the American Public Works Association, so we'll see where this goes. In judging for the award, the judges are looking for projects that demonstrate excellence in several categories, including construction management techniques, on-schedule completion, safety performance and safety program, community relations, environmental preservation, unique or unusual accomplishments under adverse conditions, and I think we all know the construction setting for this project in an active flood control channel with lots of interesting things happening, and then sustainability. So staff, we just lost Shireen, but, oh no we didn't, sorry. A member of our public here, Shireen, plans to issue a press release within the next day or so. And I just want to say kudos to all the staff and consultants and contractors and others that were involved in this project. We had partners at the regulatory level, resource agencies, our own staff in the capital projects group. Water resources is a big lift. And we're not done yet, of course. As the board knows, we're actively engaged in our other big downstream project too. So I just wanted to pass that along, make sure the board's aware, and there'll be more fanfare coming out of this shortly.
Make sure that Director Weed gets a double dose of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. When might we find out about the national awards?
So that's in September.
Okay.
Now it's part of a conference, and so we know what's happening with conferences these days, so maybe it's tentative, but it's planned for September currently.
Okay. Well, I'm excited.
Yeah. And just so that the board is aware, at the appropriate time, staff intends to submit an application for the Clare Hill Award, the Aqua Award for the fish program, the fish passage program. That's very competitive too, so we can't promise anything, but we think we have a pretty compelling story. Then if we receive that award at an Aqua conference, perhaps Director Weed will be president and will be willing to accept the award.
No, that'd be nice.
Just saying it with affection. Okay, so if I may.
Yes, please.
Item 6.4.4, John Wunderlich has a few words to share about AB 401, the final report on recommendations for a statewide low-income water rate assistance program that may be of some interest to the board.
Right. So several years ago, the state passed AB 401. It required the State Water Resources Control Board to issue recommendations for how to establish a statewide low-income assistance program. The final report was issued about 2 weeks ago, and it identified 3 broad components to a statewide program. The first component would be credits, or a credit issued directly on the bill, and the amount of the credit would depend on the cost of water in a particular agency's jurisdiction. So the more expensive the water for 6 units, the bigger the credit would be. For ACWD, the amount would come out to about $23 per bill. Our current credit is $25 per bill, so it's pretty similar. The second component is a renter's credit, which would be available as a tax rebate through the Franchise Tax Board. So actually, water agencies have been removed from the second component entirely. Whereas the first component, we would have responsibility for getting folks enrolled in the program, but with how the state has recommended it in this report, we would be able to get reimbursement from the state for the amount of credits issued to customers. The third component of the program is what they're calling a water crisis assistance program. So if a customer falls behind on their bill and has had their water disconnected for non-payment, or is at risk of having it disconnected for non-payment, they could apply up to one time per year for something in the range of $400 to $800 to pay past due invoices and have their water service restored. The way that would work is a potential beneficiary of that component of the program would work with the community organization to apply for participation. And then ACWD would also submit to the state for reimbursement for anything issued. But the way it seems structured initially is that we would not have a responsibility for eligibility determination for this component. It would work through a local community organization, which could be something like the Fremont Family Resource Center. The eligibility threshold that's suggested is 200% of the federal poverty level. As a district, in recognition of the cost of living in this area, the board did just last month adjust our own threshold for help on tap above that. And I can tell you that we've started to have a few customers approved that are now in that kind of higher income bracket that's newly eligible, so it's nice to see that those are starting to come in. What's unclear to us is how existing programs, which many agencies already have, might be affected or merged with a new statewide program. And so they also suggest funding it through a combination of general taxes, whether that's income, capital gains, or property taxes, and a bottled water or soda tax. The report still lists a water use surcharge as an option, but it is not a recommended approach by the State Water Board. And so I think what we see here is that the State Board has been actually quite responsive to the concerns of water districts in trying to find ways that make it more feasible for us to administer. Having said all that, there is legislation that would be required to implement this program, in particular the funding sources and likely to delegate some regulatory authority to the State Board to really hash out all the details of how this would be implemented. And so while they have issued this final report, I would anticipate we are several years away from any state program being stood up and operating. And so I think for at least the near future, we will be working with our existing Help on Tap program to support our low-income customers.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from directors? Director Sethy.
Just a quick comment. I mentioned this in our Water Resources Committee meeting a couple days ago. Director Weed and I are both recognized as honorary Latino leaders of the Water Education for Latino Leaders Conference. And we will be attending next Friday and Saturday the conference, and they are permitting me to be a speaker at that conference to present on shifting the service charge or fixed charge of a water bill over to the property tax bill. And this has really intrigued them, and we're getting a lot of backing from them on this idea. We usually have about 80 to 100 people, maybe 120 over the course of 2 days. I would say about half are elected leaders, and we get quite a few state senators and state assembly members there. the argument that I put forward is that shifting the burden onto the property owner will help alleviate the burden on many of the disadvantaged communities where they are primarily renters. They're not owners of property. And so we have advanced this idea out of the Aqua Local Government Committee. It's going to be heard at the spring conference in the, the Aqua Legislative Committee. And so the WELL Conference is a supporter of advancing this further. And this ties in with AB 401, which they were enthusiastic backers of. So that's it.
So I just have one request. I think the issue of moving the fixed cost to property tax is still being discussed by this board. So I would just caution that when you make that presentation, please make it clear that it is from you as an individual director. I would greatly appreciate that.
I have, and
Thank
I
you.
have done so as well in the Aqua Local Government
Thank you.
Committee.
All right, with that, any other items?
Yes, one brief one. As the board is aware, I have been providing you all with periodic COVID-19 contingency planning updates from the district. I've been doing that via email. I haven't received a lot of feedback, but we did, as staff, implement more measures today to try to achieve the two main goals that we have, and that is to protect our employees as well as to continue to provide the essential service that we do to the community. I was planning on sending the board an updated email possibly tomorrow about these additional measures that we've implemented. And you can see we've tried to do that here in the boardroom. The governor has also provided more flexibility in terms of how we convene our public board meetings, in terms of participating electronically, the rules that require the agenda to be a certain way or that you'd have notifications and be available to the public at a certain location have been relaxed. So if that is of any interest to any of you, I encourage you to contact either myself or General Counsel, Mr. Miyake. So I was planning on keeping you informed the way I have been. I'm just kind of checking to make sure that that's still satisfactory. Okay, great. So that's all we had for GM reports this evening, correct? Okay, just double checking. Thank you.
Okay, then let's move on to director's comments, reports on meeting attended. Item 7.1, Director Sethy on attendance at the California Water Commission meeting in Sacramento.
California Water Commission meeting, I delivered prepared remarks on behalf of the district to the commissioners. That's all I have to report there.
Thank you. 7.2, Yosa Conveyance Finance Authority meeting.
At the meeting, we only had 5 minutes of routine items. There was approximately an hour, a little bit more, in closed-door session. There are legal issues that we're dealing with that will be presented to the board at a future time.
Okay. And I just want to say thank you for attending and representing the district on the Financing Authority. Thank you. And 7.3, I guess we will push back to next month because Director Weed is not here. So 7.4, Director Sethy, groundwater monitoring.
Yes, I spoke about this a little bit earlier in the meeting, so I'll be really brief here. This was my first attendance at a Groundwater Resources Association meeting. I found it thoroughly enjoyable. I learned a lot. I want to highlight for the board and public that what was very much discussed throughout all the topics was where everybody is implementing their GSAs throughout the state of California. And everything is moved from beyond the formation of their GSAs now to data collection and to setting up databases that are available to their stakeholders. I did find it very fascinating, all of these visual, I don't know what you call them, the graphical versions of their groundwater
A
systems.
3D model?
Yeah, all the 3D modeling that's going on, and the application of AI to modeling their groundwater systems. I think that there are some real applications for our district. I collected a lot of information. Unfortunately, I didn't bring it tonight, but I'll pass along all of those, the vendor information and presentations that I had. I'm not sure if I will attend one of these for a while into the future. It was extremely technical, but spending my career in Silicon Valley, I really enjoyed it. And it gave me a new world view of where our industry is. So that's my report.
Thank you. So with that, the next item is item 8.1.
Yes, and just before we get to 8.1, I can't resist doing this. But I know that some of you on the board appreciate animals, and I just saw that the World Health Organization, and this is related to the COVID-19, announced that dogs cannot get COVID-19. Dogs can be released from quarantine as a result. So I guess you can say that who let the dogs out?
What about my cats?
Sorry, I didn't see an announcement about cats, Paul.
Oh, boy.
So on that note, going back to open session, item 8.1, designation of ACWD real property negotiators for a proposed Caltrans acquisition of ACWD property and property interests related to the Caltrans Alameda Creek Bridge number 33-36 replacement project. And this is Niles Road Safety Improvement Projects on State Route 84. APN numbers 85A-5500-4-1 and 507-6761-1, a portion of that parcel. And Mr. Stevenson will provide some supplemental remarks.
Just briefly, this item relates to Caltrans' proposed acquisition of one district property of approximately 0.4 acres and an approximate 0.11 acre portion of another district property, together with one permanent and one temporary easement for these properties within Niles Canyon. The acquisitions are proposed in support of Caltrans Highway 84 Safety Improvements Project in Niles Canyon. Staff recommends the board designate Judy Rotter, Development Services Supervisor or Manager, and Ed Stevenson, me, Manager of Engineering and Technology Services, as agency negotiators.
And that would need to be done by motion, second, and board action.
Any questions, comments from the board? Do I have a motion then?
I'll make the motion for staff recommendation.
Second?
Directors Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Sethy, and Huang.
Aye. Thank you. That would take us to item 9, closed session. Right?
Yeah, and I'd be happy to bring us into closed session. We're going to go into closed session for 2 items tonight. The first is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property is property on State Route 84 between Fremont and Sunol, APN 85A-5500-4-1, Castro Valley, California, and APN 507-761-1, a portion, Fremont, California. The agency designated negotiators are Judy Rotter and Ed Stevenson. The negotiating parties, State of California, Department of Transportation, and under negotiation is price in terms of payment. The second closed session is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators, property N3 Cattle Company consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessor parcel numbers were furnished by the owner's representative and are attached to this agenda. and the agency negotiators are Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson.
All right,
Now
then,
convened closed session.
with that, we'll adjourn to the operations conference room for the closed session.
And closed session will be in the operations conference room.
All right, so would the general counsel do the honor to report back on the closed session?
Sure, I'd be happy to, thank you. Just for starters, Director Weed, who is not present for the bulk of the board meeting tonight, did participate in the 2 closed sessions, and that was authorized by the governor's executive order, which was issued today, and so he was able to participate by teleconference, which he did in the 2 closed sessions. So the board met in closed session for 2 items. The first item was pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property was the property on State Route 84 between Fremont and Sunol, APN 85A-5500-4-1, Castro Valley, California, and APN 507-761-1, portion of that property in Fremont, California. The agency negotiators, Ed Stevenson and Judy Rotter. Negotiating parties, State of California Department of Transportation. Under negotiation, price and terms of payment. And in the closed session, the board, by a 5-0 vote, took action. However, that action does not need to be reported pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.1. For the second closed session, the board met pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators. The property, N3 Cattle Company, consisting of 131 parcels and approximately 50,535 acres in Alameda County, Santa Clara County, San Joaquin County, and Stanislaus County. Assessor parcel numbers were furnished by the agency's representative and are attached to the agenda. The agency negotiators, Robert Shaver and Ed Stevenson. The negotiating parties are the N3 Cattle Company, LLC, RENJR, and RENJR Trust. Under negotiation, price and terms of payment, and in that closed session, direction was given to the agency negotiators. And that concludes the open session reports.
Thank you, Council. And with that, I believe we have one more director's item.
Yes.
Director's report.
I have to pull up the date. My apologies. I attended via teleconference a committee meeting, the Business Development Committee for Aqua, of which I am now a board member, a committee member. That took place on February 12th at noon. We primarily went over the function of the Business Development Committee and the roles that each committee member would play, as well as setting up our next official committee meeting, which will take place in April, though because of the COVID-19 situation, it still hasn't been scheduled.
That's it? All right, with that, then I'll call the meeting adjourned at 11:09.